Great, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Absolutely, better ways and not so better ways to do that. So first off, hats to all of you for being here for this final stretch. It's been a privilege to be a part of this. So a path to greater ease. So really looking at that caregiving experience. And just a few, I don't want to bombard this presentation with a lot of data and stats, but I think this sort of sets the tone. If we think about caregiving and the caregiving experience, this was some research that was done a few years ago, and it said that about 75% of caregivers are concerned about their health, 61% suffer from high emotional stress, 53% experience strain regarding family issues, 43% experience high physical stress, 33% report symptoms of depression. Again, what we also probably recognize is that oftentimes when caregivers have to self-report about their own conditions, they oftentimes minimize their own situation. So I actually think the statistics are probably even more alarming than this. And caregivers of a person living with a neurodegenerative disease are more likely to have high levels of stress hormones, reduced immune function, increased hypertension, and coronary artery disease. But my intention in this isn't to share with you all the gloom and doom about caregiving. It's really to talk about how do certain caregivers have the ability to overcome this situation and the challenges that go along with caregiving. I've been had the opportunity over the last now 18 or so years to meet hundreds of caregivers as I facilitated support groups for that number of years. And one of the caregivers that I got to know quite well, and I'm still very close to her, is a woman named Rosalie. And Rosalie came into a program that I helped create called the Habit Program. Her husband had a dementia called Lewy body dementia. And what I found and was really interested about Rosalie is she just had this way of going through this journey that really was intriguing to me. And even before her husband's diagnosis, Rosalie started keeping a journal. And so as I got to know Rosalie more and more, she agreed to share her journal with me through all of these years. Her husband just went into hospice last week rather. And so this is a little bit of Rosalie's journal, and I want to share things with you because I think it's going to start to set the stage for this common experience that we're sharing called caregiving. And in one of Rosalie's journal pages, she says this. She said, "I feel like I'm in quicksand and can't find solid ground." She goes on to say, "I struggle to adjust and adapt to so many changes. I feel so angry, frustrated. Everything is such an endeavor. I keep reminding myself to go slowly, to stay calm, and to take it easy. I am not doing so great in this role. I want to run away." Almost 2 decades ago, when I started facilitating support groups, I began to discover something that I found very interesting. And that was that I would bring groups of caregivers together, and by many accounts, they had a lot of things in common. They came together because their significant partner had a neurodegenerative disease. Oftentimes, they were sort of in the same stage with their disease. They had similar social networks. They had similar support networks. Oftentimes, they even came from a similar socioeconomic place. But with all of those similarities, there was some vast differences between caregivers. In my experience, there seemed to be kind of this group of caregivers, care partners I like to call them, who had this ability through the ebbs and flows of this experience from somewhere to have this depth of resilience. And then there was this other group of caregivers who, again, in a lot of things being similar, found themselves in this very deep, dark place. And that continued to be where they went. And as time went by, I saw them spiraling down deeper and deeper and deeper. And so I became very curious about this situation. Why is it that some care partners have this ability to grasp into this inner place of resilience, while others seem to go further down into this dark place? And here's what I came up with. Here's what I started to notice really separated the two groups of caregivers. These were the qualities that determined, as far as I could tell, resilient caregivers who were living, by all accounts, fairly well, and those who were really in a place that was diminished, that diminished their quality of life. And the first thing I noticed was their ability to accept. So we talk about acceptance, and this is how I think of acceptance. Acceptance is not, first of all, liking it, agreeing with it, or giving in. Acceptance is this. It's letting go of the need to control it and making peace with what is. There was a pivotal shift, and not everybody who I met came in to these support groups in a place of acceptance. But what caregivers would tell me is that when they got to that place of being able to be in acceptance far more often than they were in denial, a pivotal shift took place in their ability to cope and overcome the challenges of this situation. One caregiver said this, "I find calm when I stop trying so hard to make things different." And by the way, I don't think you have my slides, but if you want my slides, please let me know. Go pick up, I have a business card out on the table out there for Mayo Clinic, and I'm happy to send them to you. Just send me a quick note with my email. My email's on that business card. So when we talk about acceptance, here's sort of three areas. When I talk about making room for acceptance, there's lots of different ways that care partners do this, but here's three common things that I've noticed. And one is that these caregivers accept that a diagnosis with all of its implications will have a profound impact on their marriage, their relationship, and or their friendship. There's kind of no other way around that. They accept, these caregivers, that they will not be perfect and that imperfection is sort of the name of the game, and they expect that they will get angry. And the third thing I notice is they're in this place of recognizing impermanence. In other words, that everything changes. Where you are today isn't different than where you've been and where you will be a few months from now. The opposite of acceptance is resistance. The problem with resistance is I think resistance creates excess suffering, but acceptance doesn't change your situation, but it eases the suffering, takes the edges off the suffering. What else? The other thing I noticed about caregivers who have this place of resilience is their ability to employ empathy. Empathy is the practice of understanding another person's experience from their perspective. It really is the ability to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and see the world through their lens. And it empowers us to do a lot of things. This came back from Rosalie's journal. She said, "I kept trying to imagine what it was like to be in John's shoes, slowly and surely losing ability, self-esteem, status, and self-confidence. When I was feeling frustrated, I would tell myself, if he could, he would." What empathy allows us to do is to see the human condition, is to see the person behind the disease, and to recognize at the end of the day, whether we have this disease or no disease or some other disease, our humanity and our humanness remains intact, which means that there are some basic human needs that we all have that do not go away with this disease. And those are the need to feel respected, the need to have choice and control, the need to feel that our life has purpose, and the need to feel needed. You see, what resilient caregivers will do by employing empathy is to recognize that when they focus their attention on meeting these basic human needs, things go better for them and the person they're caring for. So what do I mean when I say the need to feel respected? That means to first see the person and who they are before his or her diagnosis or disease. As one individual said who has a neurodegenerative disease named Sylvia, she says, "I am Sylvia. I was Sylvia before I was diagnosed, and I'm still Sylvia after being diagnosed. I'm still the same person. Treat me in the same way. Talk to me the same way. Include me in conversations as you would before." The need to feel respected means that we all need to be treated like an adult at all times and under all circumstances. There's something out there that's not just specific to these diseases or neurodegenerative diseases, but sometimes more just generalized into how we might speak to an older adult. And you might know what I'm talking about. Sometimes the tone of our voice changes. Our body language might change. The words might change a little bit when we start talking to somebody who we think has an illness or is an older adult. And it sounds like you're speaking to a younger child in the way that you change your voice, or that you're overly directive. Your words start to sound like this: I want you to, you need to, it's time to, or you start answering for the person. You'd like to do this, I think, or I don't really think you'd like to do that. Sometimes it can sound like baby talk or patronizing or demeaning. And believe me, people know when they're being communicated to with respect and when they're not. There was a study that was published in the Journal of Nursing not too long ago that looked at the ways in which people, older adults, react when this elder speak language is employed. And what it showed was that people, when they're talked to in this particular way, are more likely to become agitated, angry, withdrawn, or apathetic. Empathy allows us to see and to respond to another human need, which is the need to have choice and control. So think about this for yourself. When sentences start out like this: I want you to, it's time to, you need to, we need to. No, not like that. You can't, I'll do that for you. Think about how often people with these kinds of diseases might have days that include a lot of language. And it's not that we're doing this to be difficult. These are our best efforts. We're trying to be helpful, right? But the person is hearing this: I'm in charge of you. One of the basic human needs we all have is to have the sense that we're in control of our own life. And when we don't feel like that, we get irritable and agitated and angry and frustrated. That's a natural reaction to those kinds of statements. So how do we give back some sense of choice and control? Let me just give you a few examples. So on the left, here's things that we might say, right, are the goodness of our hearts. We're trying to be helpful. Let's get your robe on. I'll cut that up for you. I'll bet you'd like the television on. I'll take care of that. Stripping individuals of their sense of choice and control. So offering choice and control sounds like, may I assist you with your robe? Would it be all right if I cut up your slice of turkey? What do you think about having the television on? Would you like some assistance with paying the bills? Think about how hearing something on the right versus the left is a completely different internal way of experiencing your relationship or that person's relationship with you. Here's a couple more ideas. No choice and control on the left. You need to take your medications. How about, can I get you some water to take with your medication? Why don't you sit over there? Instead, do you prefer to sit on the couch or in the recliner? giving a little bit of choice. You don't really want to do that now, do you? Instead, what's your opinion about going out for dinner? Or no, not like that. Instead of always correcting, and I got this from my folks who work in improv. You know, they kind of take whatever anybody gives them, and nobody's ever wrong, right? If you go to an improv show, they take it. And so what they'll do is whatever you say, they'll say yes, and. Yes, and another way might be like this. So simple ways that we're bringing back that sense of choice and control. Ask, offer choices, include in decisions every day, and adapt a no wrong way spirit. One of the daughters said to me after she'd worked a little bit on reframing communication with her mother, they went and visited her mother in a care facility, and she came back and said, "This has been our most delightful visit with my mother in years, not because she changed, but because we changed." And what she was talking about was the way that they communicated, the words that they now used to give her that sense of choice and control. Empathy sees the need to feel that life has purpose and the need to feel needed. It is a basic human need that we all have. For a number of years, when I would meet with individuals who had recently been diagnosed with a neurodegenerative disease, Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body dementia, any number of things, I got into the habit of asking two questions. And it changed the way I think about things going forward. And the two questions I'd asked individuals newly diagnosed with the disease was, what are you worried about? And what do you hope for? And the answer that I got most of the time answered both the worry and the hope. And it sounded something like this. I want a reason to get up in the morning, and I want it to matter. That was both the worry and the hope that they had. I heard that more often than, I hope in the next year there's a cure for my disease. I'm sure if we talked, they would have eventually brought that up. But first and foremost, I want a reason. I want my life to matter. I want to feel needed. I want to believe that my life will continue to have purpose. And when we begin to see these basic needs in individuals with these diseases, we begin to see hope. Because all of us have the ability as care partners and families to give people back this sense of purpose and the need to feel needed. So when we think about the need to feel needed and the need to have a life that has purpose, what does that mean? Recognize the need to contribute. Sometimes we oftentimes want to jump in and do things for the individual. Focusing on strengths and abilities. We don't do this well in the medical world. What do? You come in on a regular basis and we do some kind of assessments to further tell you what more things you can no longer do. We tell you what more decline that you have. I really want to advocate and hope that I can be helpful in developing some tools and assessments. When people come in for an evaluation, they leave with information about what they can still do, what they can still strengthen, what their capabilities still are. Think about what a different experience that could be. And it leads into this. Avoid assuming that the person is incompetent. These beliefs will influence your attitudes and your behaviors. And they also influence the confidence of the person with this disease. Because when we start believing that somebody can't do something, they start believing that they can no longer do something. Encourage often, praise often. The person is not unhappy or upset simply because of their disease or me. This comes from a caregiver. They are living in unwanted dependency and loss. They need to feel useful, respected, and loved. So the real truth is, most distress arises when an emotional need is threatened. For years, I've worked on this team, and what we would do is we'd go into residential communities when there were individuals there who were showing signs of irritability and aggression and agitation, and we'd try to figure out what was going wrong and what we could do to improve the situation. And when we, after years of kind of looking at what caused individuals' irritability, agitation, and aggression, the most common thing we found, the most common predictor of agitation, irritability, and aggression, what do you think it was? It was boredom. It was boredom. The need to feel needed, the need to feel that my life has meaning and purpose. Think how threatened that is in the life of somebody who's getting older and may have a neurodegenerative disease. So when I'm going in to do a consultation or to help a family who says, yes, we're noticing irritability or agitation or aggression, first thing I'll ask about is, what kind of meaningful life does this person have right now, and what can we do to contribute to that meaningful life? And then this is my checklist after that. Are they in any way feeling shamed or humiliated? Are they being told what to do, when to do it, how to do it all day long? And of course, does this person feel when they get up in the morning that they have a reason to get up in the morning? And 95% of the time, if these are in check, we're not seeing irritability, agitation, anger, or apathy. So, the difference between kind of the dark side of caregiving and the ability to overcome starts with acceptance. It moves into employing empathy so that you can see and respond to those human emotional needs. And the other thing that I've noticed in caregivers who have this ability to maintain some level of resilience and to overcome is that these care partners who overcome recognize that it's not actually the situation they're in that causes excess anger or stress. It's not actually the situation that they're in that limits their ability to cope. The excess stress comes from the way they think about the situation, their thoughts. This is where mindfulness-based dementia caring comes in. And I know with the support group that I was a part of yesterday, some of the folks in there have employed mindfulness and shared some stories about absolutely how this has impacted their ability to do what they do as best they can, all while taking care of themselves. So what is mindfulness? I like to first of all describe what it's not, because I think there's a lot of misperceptions. Mindfulness is not a panacea or a cure for everything. It's not a religion, a state of bliss, an empty mind. Controlling the mind, mind control, something to harass yourself about because there's one more thing in the day that you should be doing. And it's not an assurance that you will always be happy, well, safe, and stress-free. Jon Kabat-Zinn's definition of mindfulness is mindfulness means paying attention on purpose in a particular way to what's going on in this very moment without attaching judgment to it. And when we start paying attention to our thoughts, we recognize that very often we are attaching judgment to everything that we do, especially things that we do in a caregiving role. And it's often self-critical and doubting the job that we're doing. I like this definition of mindfulness. Mindfulness is being aware of what's happening right now without wishing it were different, enjoying the pleasant without holding on when it changes, because it will, and being with the unpleasant without fearing it will always be this way, because it won't. I like that definition. I think it suits the caregiving experience. Mindfulness is a practice, and one of the things that we're practicing is we're choosing to open up and create an awareness and space for the very emotions we're going through at any given moment. And what are some common emotions that I've heard some of you talking about in the last day or two? You've talked about guilt, anger, worry, loss, loneliness, resentment. These ring true for many of you. So what mindfulness would do with all of these emotions is make room for them. Jon Kabat-Zinn also says this: in order to change negative feelings, we first have to notice them. To be in relationship with what you're going through, to hold it and in some sense befriend it, is where healing lies. Because if you stuff the guilt, the resentment, the worry, the disappointment, and the anger, you don't just stuff some emotions, you stuff everything. And then you no longer have the ability to experience joy and love. Because on the other side of anger is joy. And you need to make space for all of it. That's the human experience. Mindfulness is being aware of our pattern to become entangled in our stories and lost in our incessant thinking and doing. Our mind is a storyteller. It takes this idea and we dramatize it and we catastrophize it, and we oftentimes expect the worst. Most of the time, our mind is not on the present moment. Most of the time, our mind is either on the past or on the future. Pay attention, because you'll find when your mind is just wandering, it's in one of those two places at least half of the time. What's the problem? The past usually means ruminating, and the future usually means worrying. So we have these stressful thoughts, and usually it's worrying or rumination. And when we have thoughts, the body reacts to these thoughts, and the body tenses up and increases the likelihood that we will have dis-ease and all those health problems that I talked about in the beginning. I love what Mark Twain said: some terrible things have happened in my life, some of which actually happened, many of which are catastrophized in our own mind. So mindfulness is observing our impulses and feelings in order to skillfully respond in the moment. Because what we tend to do is not respond, what we tend to do is react. And then we feel guilty oftentimes because of that reaction. So mindfulness is an opportunity to move from the reaction state that we habitually do over to a place where we're responding instead. So we have the stimulus. We have something that makes us angry, probably many times throughout the day. And then we have this space in between. It's called mindfulness, and it gives us the freedom to make a choice and then respond rather than react. So it's the practice of creating space between the stimulus and the response. It's focusing our attention on the now. And there's many ways to do that, and I'm not going to go into a lot of them or many of them today, but there's a lot of different ways to do it, and some work better for some than others. But I want to leave you with just 3 ideas of mindfulness practices. And one that I particularly like is joyful awakening. And I like joyful awakening because we sort of need to capture our runaway thoughts right away in the morning. The most common time for a heart attack, by the way, is right away in the morning. And I think a lot of that has to do with we wake up in the morning and immediately our mind starts racing, right? And immediately it starts to go to all the things we need to do. It pulls up all the worries that we have, everything that we need to accomplish. And we wake up actually oftentimes when our feet hit the floor already in a state of distress. So what joyful awakening does is it puts pause before your feet hit the floor. And you can do it in a couple of different ways. I have next to my bed, when I was practicing this, I had 5 individuals that were listed on a sheet of paper, or you can have pictures of them. And I would just close my eyes and really rest my attention on these 5 individuals. They each get about 10 seconds or so. And it just put me in this place where I'm starting my day recognizing the gifts that I have in my life, recognizing the support that I have. Some people like to have an affirmation next to their bed, or a prayer, or something that they say to themselves a few times before they get out of bed, so that you're actually wiring your mind for positivity versus negativity, which makes its way in without this mindfulness. This is one that when I do the mindfulness-based caring program, that people say is the most beneficial for them, and it's called STOP. And it's just this simple practice when you're noticing some sort of a stressor or something that makes you angry. Before you respond, you have this, and caregivers will have these stop signs placed all over their house just to remind them to do this. So there's some kind of stimulus that's causing them stress. They take a moment, they stop, they take in a deep breath. They observe themselves. What thoughts am I having? How is my body reacting? What's my jaw doing? What are my shoulders doing? So they're getting a sense in terms of how they're reacting to this stimulus. And that pausing and that taking a breath and that observing has now bought you probably about 5 to 10 seconds. Just enough time to thoughtfully respond versus the reaction that you habitually probably tend to do. And the last one comes from a woman named Kristen Neff, and Kristen Neff is out of the University of California, San Francisco. She writes a lot on self-compassion. You can watch her YouTube videos. She has a book called Self-Compassion. She raised an autistic son, and so really talks about her ability to be able to kind of cope with these unpredictable stressors. And so she has something called the self-compassion break, and I want to end quickly by just taking you through this self-compassion break. It'll take less than a minute. So stay in your chair, but seated comfortably. If you can, uncross your legs and sit back in your chair so you can really feel the back of your body supported by the back of your chair. Let your hands rest comfortably to begin with, wherever you want them to relax. Take a deep cleansing breath in through the nose. Fill up the lungs, let the rib cage expand, and then exhale the air out the mouth. Close your eyes. Take one hand, place it on your heart. Take your other hand, place it on top of that hand, and a little bit of pressure onto your heart. Feel the beating of your heart, a sign of that vital energy that is you. Bring to mind a situation in your life that's difficult. I'm sure that's not hard to do, right? And then say these words to yourself. This is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. I am not alone. May I give myself the compassion I need. May I find ease. You can open your eyes, let your hands down. So what this did, as simple as it sounded, this is a moment of suffering, brings you, that's the mindfulness piece of it, because now you are owning and making space for whatever emotion you happen to have right now. That's step one. Number two is to recognize the shared human experience. One of the things that's been so beneficial about the last couple of days that I've heard from many of you is that there's something pretty magical that happens when you bring groups of people together who are going through the same experience. Even though you're not leaving with an easy answer or a cure, the ability to recognize that this is part of a shared human experience is healing. And the third part of that is, may I give myself the compassion I need. I need. And saying those words to yourself. Finally, one of the excerpts in Rosalie's journal, this came about a year ago. She said, I'm able to recognize that caregiving is now the major chapter in my life. My future holds other chapters, but for now I'm being remade and reformed by my role of caregiving into a gentler, more compassionate, more patient, kinder person. So next year, beginning of the year, I will be offering another mindfulness caring program. It's 8 weeks long and a half-day retreat. If you happen to live in the area or don't mind a drive if you're not too far away and are interested in learning more about it or participating in that, pick up one of my cards out on the table, be in contact with me, and we can talk more about it. So thank you. If you want me to take time to take questions. All right. Questions? Yes, sir.
Acceptance is, it was easy for me. I accept my situation as a caregiver. But it doesn't make me like it. I still have these resentments. And that kind of ideal person you were talking about, I suspect is probably a great minority among us who can rise to that level. Some of the problems I've had in like my relationship with my wife is the lack of feeling that she appreciates what I am doing for her. Mm-hmm. You know, I have that kind of anger, and I get anger too at our friends, and you hear the same thing. I'm always being warned that there's such a thing as caregiver stress. And if I hear it one more time, I would like to punch somebody in the nose. I know that. Then they will leave and say, if there's anything I can do, let me know. Yeah. And if I hear that one more time, you know, I would just like somebody to come and say, Brian, leave for today, and I will take care of Jan for the day, and I'll do all of those things, or even for a part of the day. But that never happens. Mm-hmm. And of course, you're not just going to ask your friends for that sort of thing. And another thing that I really run into that is some of the things you're addressing is like, oh, maybe this one moment when you can use STOP. But the trouble is, it's not just that one moment for that situation. My wife has certain repetitive behaviors that I have estimated how many times she's done a certain thing that makes me angry. And it's like 30,000 times, you know? And if the 30,000th in one time, I don't think I can control myself. And how many times can I do stop? You know, I'm not going to live that long.
Bravo, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that. And I'll just say a couple things. Acceptance is not liking it. Acceptance is not agreeing with it. So acceptance doesn't mean you have to get to this place of liking it. Acceptance means that you can be angry. And acceptance means that you may use stop 40% of the time, and the other 60% of the time you get angry. And that's where self-compassion steps in and says, it's okay for me to be angry. May I give myself the compassion I need right now, because you have every right to feel angry in that moment.
One of the things that I found has been really difficult is that
where is it coming from?
My wife and I both have different levels of acceptance. You know, I may have accepted it more than she has or whatever, and days, you know, one day she'll accept it, and the next day she'll not accept it, or vice versa. How do you find those happy moments when there's always that difference in levels?
Yeah. The thing too about acceptance is it's not linear, right? You don't like one day you're in denial and then, oh, you've moved into acceptance, and so you've crossed the barrier and you never go back. Acceptance ebbs and flows. And in fact, some days we just need to be in denial because it feels good and it helps us cope through that day. So acceptance is accepting the fluidity and the patterns and the ebbs and flows of it, and recognizing that there are days when you're just not going to be in the same place. And that's part of this condition as well. And recognizing it, I think. It's a hill, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It is. I think the thing that I think is the biggest breakthrough for caregivers, and this gentleman over here I think really alluded to it, is just owning your feeling and giving yourself permission and compassion, wrapping yourself in compassion on the days when you're angry. Or the days, and here's what happens with stops sometimes. Caregivers will say, yeah, I did the stop, and then I assessed what I was thinking, and I'm like, I'm feeling really impatient. I'm really impatient because this is the 30th time today I've dealt with this. And so in their head, as they've stopped and paused, they'll say something like, well, hello, there you are again, impatience. Right? So they recognize what it is that they're feeling. And just saying, yeah, my impatience is really there today. My anger is really there today. My frustration is really high today. When we own it, when we bring it to that level of consciousness, it actually dissolves it, not completely, but it takes the edges off of it a little bit. When we're not recognizing it and it's just festering and finding its way deeper and deeper and deeper, it finds a way out. It finds a way to explode. Naming it, owning it, and sitting alongside your anger and your frustration with as much self-compassion as you can is where I think the healing and the resilience lie. It's not that there's these group of caregivers who just have this ability to accept. These are groups of caregivers who are able to be angry in the face of a difficult situation. They're able to feel their frustration, and they're able to make breathing space for it and be vulnerable around it. One of the things, too, that happens in support groups, and this happened, I know, yesterday when many of us came together, is there was a lot of crying. And some people said, I had one woman today and she was in tears and she's like, but I never cry, this isn't like me. And I think what that tells me is that you've come to a safe space, and if you've allowed some emotions that have probably been there for a while to come up. And I think that's a healthy thing. If you can get angry in a healthy way, that's a really good thing to do. I remember one caregiver, many of them, who said, I can't do stop, but what I can do is go in the bathroom, turn my shower on, and scream. That dissolves it for that moment.
You know, one thing I sometimes think, I don't know if it helps me or not, but these disorders, there are two victims. The person that has the disorder and the caregiver, especially if it's a spouse.
Yeah, you heard that. Did you guys all hear that? So he said in these diseases, there's really two people who are suffering. There's the person who has the disease, and there's a person who stands alongside that individual who has the disease. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.